Hello, welcome back to Are You Seeing This? I am Mo.
And I'm Sarah.
And we are going to talk about, I'm going to start and we're going to talk about recession music because I've been seeing on my TikTok a lot of people talk about that we're back in our recession music era. So let me start here. Sarah, what music are you listening to right now?
Well, I'm listening to so much stuff. I've been listening to a lot of Charlie XCX. There was the new Bad Bunny. I've kind of been hanging out in like the reggaeton section of Spotify, listening to like Raúl Alejandro and all that. And then of course, there's some good new dance music coming out, like Miss Lady Gaga and do you remember the Cataracts?
I'm familiar with the eye problem.
No, the Cataracts. They're a music group. And they had that song Like a G6 that came out in like 2008, and they always had that producer tag that would be like, okay, it's the Cataracts.
So it's cataracts like the stuff in your eye.
Do you know what I'm talking about? They had those songs where in the beginning they go, it's the Cataracts, and that would be like the producer tag.
No. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Am I the only, I was listening.
Sarah, I listened to Hosier and Florence and the Machine on repeat, and sometimes there's some Fleetwood Mac in there.
Okay, so you okay.
Or The Amazing Devil.
I was heavy in the dance pop, recession music of 2008 and onwards, and I feel like they were 2010s, but they were similar. I can't believe you don't know the Cataracts.
See, if we're talking about 2008, I was 12 and I was at the mercy of my mom's CDs. So I listened to a lot of Katie Lang at the time.
Okay. I feel like
very influential on me.
In the 12 onwards, I was very on my iPod, in the YouTube app. No, I had a different app because YouTube didn't let you exit and play music.
I was afraid to go to YouTube.
Oh.
I was afraid of computer viruses.
Honestly, I guess it's kind of a miracle YouTube hasn't given people's computers viruses. It's a bit of a sketchy...
As far as we know. But anyways,
Mo's waiting for a class action lawsuit to get in on the ground floor.
But anyway.
For years and years, you're like, finally, so my fears will be justified.
I listen to YouTube now. Anyways, circling back, before we got on the Cataracts, you mentioned Lady Gaga, and I'm glad you mentioned her, because that kind of circles into my little outline here. But first I want to talk about, have you ever heard of the song Brother, Can You Spare a Dime?
No.
So this was a song that was at the height of popularity during the Great Recession. And so this was a very popular song that's basically about what everyone was going through at the time. You've lost your job, you can't pay for anything, you can't buy bread. And it was actually, as I was researching this, I was looking at an article on the KennedyCenter.org. It was actually written by two Jewish immigrants, which I found was really interesting. But anyways.
We say that because we have Jewish heritage separately. I would just like to clarify that.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah, I should have.
Some people... there's just some people who have some strange opinions out there, and we weren't pointing that out to be interesting realization.
I'm noting that because I'm proud of my heritage and Sarah's proud of her heritage. Oh God, sorry. Okay, this is going to. And also the writer E.Y. Harburg for the song is also the writer for Over the Rainbow in Wizard of Oz. But anyway.
Oh, okay, I see.
So I bring this up because this is just an example of a song that got really popular that made people feel very heard, and also kind of lifted their spirits because of that, but also was a political song. And so I bring that up because the idea of recession music, it's music that we're listening to because we're just struggling to survive and we just need something to lift our spirits. It's the general idea behind recession music. Have you been seeing people talk about it on TikTok as much as I have?
Yes, but I just I know that my frame of reference is different, and for me, when I think of recession music, or I don't know if it's even the same as music as resistance. Those are sort of I do think of the Cataracts, because the idea was to be out and dancing and partying is the distraction. So that's when it brings about some of like the best electronic music. But it's also like the sentiment I've been seeing, because also reggaeton is just having like a really big moment right now. A lot of people who previously like dismissed Puerto Rican culture, or like reggaeton was seen as ghetto for a while. Like people didn't want to listen to it. And it wasn't until Bad Bunny went mainstream, and this last album specifically, which like went back and paid homage to like salsa and the roots, like what our grandparents were listening to and dancing to. Like that's, I think, when people recognized it as like valid. But even that music, like that album had a lot of like, there's a song on it that literally the title translated to what happened to Hawaii, and it was saying like the whole sentiment behind the album is tourists are coming to Puerto Rico and ruining the culture. And already, people's, like my family left Puerto Rico. There's so much history about why people leave Puerto Rico and why that diaspora happens. And it happens because of like colonization and all of that. And so the whole album, the thesis is like, I hope my people never have to leave and we get to stay, and that we don't lose this part of our culture, even if, they try to force us to, like they did in Hawaii. So like there's that, but then there's also like some of his best dance songs I've ever heard are on that album. So it's like this idea, and I'm seeing a lot of people talk about it in Mexican music too, that like existing and being happy and showing off your like most flamboyant self is a form of resistance, because they don't want to see you and they don't want you here. So the idea is, well, I'm here and you can't make me leave and you have to see me. So like I think there's like a few different, his album was such a good example of that to me, where there's like some songs that are just like such good club songs, and some songs that just like make you cry thinking about like your abuela or whatever.
I think that's such a beautiful sentiment, yeah. And how music can really hold a culture within its sound.
Yeah.
I was reading this article on CNBC. They were writing about recession pop, and what I was really interested in is how like they note that like on paper the economy is doing well, but like that is not felt by really anybody. Like you can look, like the way they measure the economy, everything's like doing great. It's not like we're all struggling. Everyone who's young is, we can't afford houses, we can't afford groceries, we can't barely afford to get through the next month.
I found out that the reason why it looks like that is because when they do those studies, they don't account for how many different jobs people have.
Yeah, the way we're measuring is based on a way of life that is no longer here, and not accounting for how we are living. And the idea is that like in the face of this struggle that we're turning to pop music. And the one that's been in the news, one of the pop artists that's been in the news most recently is Lady Gaga, because she released the phenomenal Abracadabra during the Grammys. And a lot of people were responding like, oh, this is what we need. We need Lady Gaga right now. But also people were saying, oh, it's definitely a recession indicator. So I was reading this article on The Salon by Coleman Spilda, and the writer really goes into this about like, is Gaga an indication of the recession, or is the recession an indication that we need Gaga? I think by and large, it kind of goes back to like what you were talking about with the Bad Bunny album. Is the music because change is coming, or because we need the change? Does that make sense?
That's a good question. I also just wanted to note, I just looked it up because I thought when we started talking about this, I double checked, her debut album came out in 2008.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
This is very like, because that's, the Fame came out, and that, because she came up in that era. I also just have a lot of thoughts on where with Gaga, I also just want to note her career has been in a lull for the past few years, because she kind of like tried to elevate herself. I've seen a lot of people talking about this with Ariana Grande, with her like she's clearly appealing to a different audience now with Wicked, and she's trying to be seen differently than she was when she was a pop star. And Lady Gaga did this when she started getting into film, and she suddenly started presenting herself differently. The differences in her interviews from when she first came up to like during the Star is Born era. And a lot of people argue it's because like she was working with Tony Bennett at the time and she was trying to portray something else. To me, I think she was trying to reach a different point in her career where people saw her as more than a pop star and recognized her as like a musician to the point where like my old hairdresser here was like a huge monster and talked about how it was a big sense of betrayal to her fans when she took the Top Gun, because she did the soundtrack to the new Top Gun movie with Hans Zimmer. And like, I understand why at the time you would be like, oh, an opportunity to work with Hans Zimmer, incredible. However, she was very vocal about Don't Say Gay. And to the point where she, at some of her old award shows, like there was one red carpet, she brought an openly gay serviceman who was kicked out for his sexuality. And so she sort of left her fans behind to try to be taken seriously as an actress. And she was, you know, she did the whole circuit with like Star is Born. But then I did like her Pandemic album. It was very impressive in some ways, but like...
Was that her art pop album? Or no, that was 2013.
No, I will never forgive people for letting art pop flop, but whatever. Art pop was...
Chromatica. That was the 2020.
Chromatica, yes. And that was a good album, but it wasn't like I didn't consider it to be as innovative as her other work. And so Abracadabra is the first thing we've seen from her in a long time that I find innovative in her career, where it like borrows from her old sound and like the music video felt very advanced, and also like taking notes from what her peers were doing. Like Chromatica did something similar, like so you know how Brat, like Charlie XCX did a remix album? That was something she'd been doing for a while, and Chromatica got a remix album too. Actually, I think Charlie might have been on it, but I don't know. But like you see, like Gaga was the trendsetter when she first came up, and then by the time Chromatica happened, it didn't seem as innovative. And so this was the first thing I've seen from her in a while where I was like, I feel like the artist in her is back. I'm sure it was always there, but it just didn't feel as inspired as it is now, which weirdly does make me think this is a sign of a recession. But also, I think she's trying to bury Joker too a little bit.
Yeah, I could see that. I think, but
because Die with a Smile came out like around then, and then she put out a whole album for it, and like those exercises she does, where she does projects like that, are clearly to challenge herself and like try different genres. But I just don't. Like it's not her toolkit.
It's not what she's the master of. And yeah, because I remember talking about like her I don't know, golden era. I remember there was this one famous interview where there was this like rumor going around where people were basically implying that she was a trans woman, and someone...
Do you remember that was an interview with Anderson Cooper, by the way?
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah. In the interview it got brought up that people were saying things about her body, and she was like, okay, so what if I am? What if that's true? With absolutely no. And then like even now she's like coming back and like once again standing up for trans people, which I think is like really great in terms of like...
That's to me, because that interview has been doing the rounds on TikTok again, and people, because post her Grammys win where she publicly in front of everyone made that statement, which was needed with the timing of like the things coming out of this current administration. That is what makes me feel like if not a recession, which we know is happening, but everybody's denying.
I feel like it never ended.
It's at least a sign of the time. It never did, but it's at least a sign of the times that she's feeling the need to come back to this side of herself. I guess it was like during the Biden administration, it felt like a lot of leftist people felt like, oh, well, the work is done.
Very much so.
And just kind of left everything. And that is a little bit how it felt with her, where like she took a break from innovating to try out these other things that she had an interest in. And it feels to me like the social climate that's turning against her core fan base, not just her fan base, but she seems to be pretty cemented in the queer community with like her inner circle too. So I think that to me, one, this is a sign.
And she herself is queer.
Yes. This is a sign that one, she's a very authentic artist, but also that she is looking around even as out of touch and rich as she, you know, objectively has become. She looked around and was like, this is a time where I need to like herd my little monsters together and let them know, like, because it does feel like she's come out to be like, I feel like we need spaces to protect people again, like the the concept of a safe space got made fun of to oblivion. But it does feel like this, it's also like, it just reminds me of all those years ago when we went to Pride in New York City for the first time.
Yeah.
And we had that conversation about like what's queer, what's gay music, and you were like, well, Gaga. That's what it is. And it felt like she looked around and was like, I just feel like I need to make it clear again where I stand and who I'm for.
Because definitely in this past election, that really came up a lot with like, what are celebrities responsible for? And what power do celebrities have to make change? What power does because we're talking about recession music, like the main idea is that it's to comfort us. And as you were saying, like, it's different from resistance music or, revolution music. And it's the question I want to ask is like, what change can music itself bring about?
I think art can inspire change and inspire like post Super Bowl. I think things like Kendrick Lamar's performance, there's only so much resistance you can get from like the NFL, because I saw a lot of people complaining that he didn't do enough. But good art is meant to, I think, inspire, but also I think the question of what can artists do is one thing, and then like what can your music do is another. So like during the Short and Sweet tour, Sabrina Carpenter was like, I think September. She didn't tour for very long, but she went to a lot of cities. It was like last fall. She had voter registration booths set up so that people who went to her show could sign up to vote or register to vote. And she made her, I feel like her position was good, but Hosier had that too when I saw him last summer. And so I think that that's one action that people can do. And then things like Bad Bunny's music, I think is the only words that come to me are like for the culture, because it just reminded me of going back to like how salsa music started and like back in the 60s. And it was started because the idea is when times are tough and people don't see you, because at the time Latinos were not seen as people, especially in the Bronx. So it's like, this is our music, this is our culture. Something that was referenced in Bad Bunny's album was there was a social club in the Bronx called Tonitas. And the idea was you went and Miss Tony was there and she provided, it was a space that was as close to Puerto Rico as you could get in New York. And so it was meant to be a place where people came together. And when things are bad and you're sad, like a lot of those songs, they can have dark lyrics, but like upbeat music, because you're supposed to, I remember what a lot of the singers said at the time was they referred to it as like, all you could do is like hold your woman and dance. You still hear the sorrow and the oppression through the music, but like the music, art to me is a little bit more of a marker of culture and a bit of like a representation of what's happening at the time of the artist. And so I don't know that music itself can bring about so much change as much as like, what do you do with that momentum? Like Macklemore put out that song that was like, oh yeah, for Palestine, but it wasn't just that he put out the song to let everyone know where he stood.
He also mentioned, I think, Sudan and the Congo.
Yeah, he put out a really clear message about where he stood and put out this song. And the purpose was so that he could donate all the proceeds, which he did. It's just like there's so many different leveling degrees to it, because I think objectively that was a good thing to do. I don't know that objectively I would say that song was like high art or like some of the most advanced musical arrangement I've ever seen. But the statement and the action of doing that made a change because he made money and donated it. So I think it's a complicated question. There's a lot of different ways to look at it, because even with like Bad Bunny, like he made that music, obviously he's like profiting or whatever, but the first thing he did was he announced his tour, and it's a residency in Puerto Rico, and he made the first half of the tour only Puerto Rico residents could go and buy tickets, then the rest were open to tourists. And that tour alone is going to incredibly stimulate the economy of Puerto Rico. The one it's happening, like everyone was saying it's happening during hurricane season, but it's this summer. And so for that one felt a lot more like there's talk of resistance and all this stuff. And he also he held a concert during the election in Puerto Rico in favor, because he's pro-independence. and he's done a lot to like bake the history of Puerto Rico in some of the ways that he presents his music, and he made a short film to go along with the album that talked about the conditions of the island and the way the culture's shifting. So I think it just depends on it really depends on how the artists do it, because I don't want to put my foot on Taylor Swift's neck. She seems like a perfectly fine girl. I don't know that her endorsing Kamala Harris really made that big of a difference. I think that was more to signal to her fans where she stood. Like, okay, if Taylor Swift had registration booths at the Era Tour for the election, I think that would have made a difference, in my opinion. But I mean, I have a lot of opinions about why the election went the way it did. I also don't think pop stars can save us from, we live in a broken two-party system country. There's only so much we can do to try to like get change out there, and we're just beholden to whoever funds the Democratic Party for who gets nominated. It's whatever. But like, I think actions like that make a difference. So I do think it's an interesting conversation of what is art and art as resistance, because I think they serve so many different purposes. Even like art that sits in a museum, like it inspires, and it causes outrage, and it causes conversations. And I think the idea is that you never know who's inspired by your art and who might have seen that and been like, you know what, if Kendrick Lamar can get on the Super Bowl in front of the nation and say 40 acres and a mule, then I can go march in a protest. Those kinds of questions, because
This kind of reminds me of two things. The first is the Chicks, and the second is disco. So the Chicks reminds, because Taylor Swift has referenced the Chicks. So they are formerly known as the Dixie Chicks, and they...
Oh, I remember this happening in real time.
Yeah, they spoke out against Bush and the
Afghanistan.
Yeah, the invasion of Afghanistan, and they spoke out against him at a concert. That clip then went viral, and they were like basically canceled. What we now see is like canceling, even though they were canceled by
they were blackballed.
They were blackballed. Yeah, they couldn't.
And I feel like there's an important because I want to make that distinction, because canceled is when you lose in the court of public opinion. Blackballed is when the people who hold the money decide we're not going to work with you anymore.
You're so right. Yes. Yeah. And so that's because Taylor Swift has kind of used them as an excuse as why she's not more outspoken, because we'll see what happened to the Chicks. And it's well, the Chicks have still had something of a career though. They're still making music. They've put out albums. Yes, they were blackballed, but also they're not dead. They didn't luse their lives.
No.
And Taylor Swift, I feel has a lot more power than they did at the time when
she does. But I remember this happening because, growing up in a rural area, we're pretty into country music. It took them many years to get an audience back, to find a label who would sign them. And most people that happens to just disappear. Taylor Swift was the only, believe it or not, one of the only teen white girls in country music writing her own music, speaking from the perspective of a teen girl at the time. And she got put on such a pedestal of conservative Southern ideals of what the perfect woman should be, that I do think at the time that she came up, I understand why she kind of kept her head down and was quiet, because even though she came from money, I also want to specify that because this happened so long ago that going viral was such a different thing than it is now. There were journalists writing about it, and it was they were given such a hard time that I think that it showed a lot of strength on their part, that they stood by it and they never apologized for it.
Talking about the Chicks now.
Yeah, the Chicks. I think it showed so much moral backbone that they didn't do that. But I remember hearing the way people talked about them, the way people talked about them on the radio, the articles that came out about them. And it was rough because when you're canceled by people tweet at you and you can put the phone down and just leave.
Yeah.
When You've pissed off a record label. You're going to see it in magazines. You're going to call. No one's going to want to work with you. And everywhere you turn, it's going to be there. And it took a significant amount of like social progression in the US for people to look at them differently. And that is where I catch Taylor Swift a little bit, where I do feel like in the current, I still think post-election, but pre-election, I don't think that there was like post 1989, the album coming out. I don't think there's much excuse for her to feel like she can't speak up except, girl, go to therapy. Because
yeah,
the emails that leaked of her father, I understand why she feels that way. Like, there's issues.
What leaked of her father?
Oh my God. There were all these emails from Scott Swift that leaked. He's like deranged, sending all these long emails and all these things about like how my daughter's like...
To her?
No, to other people talking about her. It's very clear that her father sees her as almost like an asset in some ways.
That does not surprise me.
And uses her as leverage. Even some of the songs she's written that like, you know, reference a fatherly relationship. I don't doubt the way she came up was rough. The way she shone in the public eye, like that would probably shake me up. That's probably a rough relationship. So I feel you, Taylor. I do. But also like, we're a billionaire now.
Yeah.
You're a billionaire. Like you can work that shit out and talk about whatever you want to talk about. You can have whatever you want at your concert. She has such undying support from her core fan base. And you know what? I don't know what the demographics of her core fan base are, because I know that some of them get really racist when they're really angry at people who criticize Taylor. So yeah. I think it would cut her profit margins, but she'd still make so much money if she was that afraid of it.
I also feel like we talk about like endorsing politicians a lot, but like they could instead just talk about policies and talk about like she could go to the library. There was like that back when Twitter was a thing instead of the zombie it is now, the Nazi zombie it is now. Yeah. But there was like this really good tweet that was in response to like Taylor Swift, like she wore a specific hoodie and like that hoodie sold out in minutes or something. And someone replied to that tweet saying like, if we could just get this woman to go to the library and take a picture with a library card, we could fix the funding problem for libraries in seconds. Like that's the thing. It's like, it doesn't necessarily have to be endorsing a politician. It could just be like taking a specific interest in one specific activist like group and just giving that your all.
Because with Kendrick Lamar, you know, putting out as much music as he has in the past year, that's very rare. He usually drops an album. We don't really hear that much from him for a long time. It's brought up a lot of people talking about the amount that he gives back to Compton, and like I saw a clip on TikTok of this woman talking about like he hosts like just these community he'll just go to like a concert in Compton, like just set it up for people who live there, like for free. Like if your kid's in an after school program, you bring your kid and he'll like go. And for someone like Pulitzer Prize winner, Grammy winner of that caliber to do something like that, to continue to give back in that way is very big. And I know that he's a little bit more overt about what he says. It's like written all in his music, but he also has a whole album where the whole thesis of the album is just like, I'm not your savior. That's not like for me to do. I'm here to make art for you. I don't know. I question how much of, because, you know, the whole thing about being a good comedian is being incredibly observant and pointing out things that are true. Sometimes I wonder if that applies to music, where like really good music is just incredibly observant and very good at like preserving culture. But some of it is innovative and like pushes boundaries. Like there's different sides to it. But like I know Taylor Swift like donates money, but I haven't heard about, you know, someone like Kendrick Lamar is so specific, being from such a specific place that is often, you know, there's not enough attention thrown to the side, like looked down on. I understand that that's like a specific example, but even so, I definitely agree that it's not just about endorsing a politician or even coming out and telling us like, like, I don't need to know who you voted for. I don't need you to like come out and talk about every single policy or something. But, you know, there's so many different things you could do. Like Chapel Roan didn't endorse it. Well, she got a lot of shit from it from the neoliberals.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like with the year Chaperone's still like, she's not new, but she is like new to this level of fame.
Yeah.
And I feel like she can kind of get some slack for that in terms of like, this is still like within a year, like she rose to this level of fame, and then people were like, well, you need to like endorse a politician.
But she made some really radical, like, you know.
Yeah, she still like made political statements. She didn't
quote
like
unquote radical statements, and she still catapulted the way that she did. So I use that more to think about, like, I really don't think it would hurt Taylor Swift at this stage, even like a few years ago, to do some of this stuff, because the only part in her, like the Miss Americana documentary happened like during a career lull she had before her pandemic albums, because that was what brought her back. And then I think the Eras tour, because she couldn't tour for so long, like brought her. But yeah, it's just like so fascinating thinking about like what role do they have, because I think it's just that they're more visible. Like, we know that they have more money than we do, and we know, although a Chapel Roan, no, she's in her first year.
Yeah,
she's not like getting money the same way Taylor Swift is. But she's another one who, in her Grammy speech, she talked about record labels dropping people if they're not successful after a year, and how she was left without like health insurance. And so her moment was when she accepted her award. She was like, record labels, we got you, do you got us? And the next day there was an article in Rolling Stone written by a label exec who called her incredibly out of touch, and talked about how she had no idea what she was talking about. And so she posted on her Instagram and was like, oh, I'm so out of touch. I'm donating, I forget the amount. It was a fair amount. There was like $10,000 to like the musicians union. And she was like, you gonna match it? If you care so much about these musicians and you say I'm out of touch, you can match it. No one's stopping you. And he just didn't say anything. But that's one where, like, I mean, she reminds me a little bit of Sinead O'Connor got blacklisted. But you can tell, that's like a good way to tell if they've actually been blacklisted, is the media articles against them are very specific and very harsh, as opposed to being, everybody's mad at Jim Carrey. Why? Why is Jim Carrey canceled?
It reminds me of what happened to Janet Jackson with her. I
literally was just talking to my dad about this and how mad I was on behalf of Janet.
Did you hear the real truth of the matter is, like, there was some big executive who had asked Janet out on a date and she had said no. And then that was the one who, like, Justin, in the aftermath of what happened, Justin Timberlake apologized to that guy, and Janet Jackson didn't personally apologize to him. She apologized to, like, the nation, which she shouldn't have had to do anyway.
Right.
And so he was, like, that executive is, like, part of the reason she got blackballed so terribly was because, like, he was mad at her for not, like, going out with him and then, like, not apologizing personally, like how Justin did. Yeah, that's just what that reminded me of, how, like...
It hurts me so bad looking back on how that was such a pattern with Justin Timberlake of, like, swooping in on, like, bullshit he caused, sucking up to people in power, and then, like, another woman takes the fall. For some of that, like, that was such a theme in his career. And I don't even think there were some cases where he was active in it, but he was passive and stood to the side and watched it happen, and was really catapulted and benefited off of that. So the whole thing makes me so mad thinking about, like, these people in power who, like, use power to abuse people, and then the people who want that power, so they stand by and watch all the people abused, and they're like, well, it won't happen to me because I'm apologizing to him, so I'll be fine, and I won't have to cancel the world tour.
The world tour. Yeah, and so, like, the other thing this reminds me of is, have you heard of that Demolition Disco Night thing that happened?
No.
Basically, like, or like Disco Died or something like that. Like, there was a lot of anger against disco music because, let's be honest, because it was made by a lot of people of color and queer people. And there was, like, this, I think it was a radio DJ who gathered people together to some baseball stadium and was like, bring all the disco records you can find and we're going to burn them. And so like they just like brought a whole bunch of disco music and records and to this baseball field. It was like after a baseball game or something, and they just destroyed all these records and everything.
Wow, you really got him. That's such like a weird response. It was like, I don't like it, I'm gonna burn media. It's like, okay, if you'd want to go huff paint fumes, you can go huff paint fumes. We don't need to take this many steps to like inhale toxic fumes.
But it is interesting how much, like, in thinking about this, about disco and the Chicks and Bad Bunny and Kendrick Lamar, how much, like, of a response you can get from people in power just from creating music.
Yeah. And it is interesting too of like what legitimizes it, because for Bad Bunny, I mean, older generations aren't so hot on reggaeton just because it's like not what they grew up with, and the lyrics can be a little much sometimes. But like this was the first time he reached back and brought them into it, and I do think that that was part of why, you know, I think some people see salsa as a respectable music, and that was the whole thing. And when that came up was like nobody saw Latinos as being able to offer anything or being people who had anything of value. And then salsa music came out and people were like, damn, because it was like right after like the swing, I guess swing was like just on the downturn, so this was like a natural progression with more drums and more horns, and it was just like beautiful and lively. And so that was one of the first times that people outside of Latin America heard the music and was like, wow, there's something here, there's like something very beautiful here. And for the first time people decided that like we had something that they wanted. And I think that I do think that his recent album was considered quote unquote higher class because he brought some of that with him, because suddenly a lot of people who didn't like reggaeton and were like, oh, I don't listen to Trap Bunny, and he did go by Trap Bunny, like that was what we called him for a little while, but they're like, no, I don't really like that. People who were like, oh, Puerto Ricans can't speak real Spanish, suddenly they all want to know the slang and they all want to know like what's going on and some of the like legends that he sang about. And I do think that some of it was because he did something different and innovative, and then people recognize some of that stuff, and without the like, you know, he still had the bass, he still had the drums, he still had all that stuff, but I do think there was an element of that because, and that was a theme at the Super Bowl of like when Kendrick brought out SZA, like their song All the Stars was nominated for an Oscar, and like a lot of this stuff was like calmer, and that was like Uncle Sam said like before that, like no, it's too loud, too much, too ghetto for the previous stuff. And like there's definitely an element of with the R&B that was a little bit more of like, you know, SZA, I love her, she makes such good R&B music, but the songs they sang were very like calm, and it wasn't so much of what people like to demonize. And so I just think it's interesting looking at the points when people become accepted by mainstream. Like, is it because you genuinely had something unique that people had to recognize? Or did you have something where suddenly they recognized it and were like, oh, well, I like salsa and I know that that's like sophisticated, so I guess this is good. I've been a little irritated by some of the responses I've been seeing where I'm like, this is funny because you guys were so quiet a few years ago and now suddenly you love Bad Bunny and now suddenly you want to go to Puerto Rico and all this stuff.
That kind of reminds me of the response to Kendrick Lamar in his dissing of Drake and how that became so popular with so many people who previously probably would have said, oh, I don't really like rap music, it's just not for me. Yeah. And now suddenly they do like it, and it's maybe you would have liked it all along, but yeah
Drake ran away, start singing in Spanish, and I mean he's always been doing that. People just don't care when they collaborate with Bad Bunny like 2017, and people didn't love him as much as we did then. Like he was still worldwide, but like worldwide is Spanish speakers, and there's a lot of them, so like some people didn't notice. But yeah, it just also makes me think about art in museums, because that was another thing I was reading an article about of like what happens to art, traditional quote unquote art during recessions. And I was thinking more of like because I started where I was like, I want to find out what happens to like experiential or like, you know, some of these installations, and I ended up finding out about like people who buy paintings in galleries, and they just stop buying them and hold on because they know the value of their art has fallen. And it was talking about people having ownership over art, and that was when I remembered, like, oh yeah, there's like this, like a few people with a lot of money who own like some of the most famous paintings in the world that are considered high art and are supposed to be like representative of culture, and also they're seen as like very highbrow, and then the rest of us, like, we don't own it and we have to pay to go see it. When the museum was first designed, like urban design, I remember learning about this, of the design of Piccadilly Circus, like in the UK. The way that they do museums are different because museums are like funded by the government, and it's not funded by private ownership as much as it is here. Like, you still have private collections, but it's definitely the default here. And so the idea was like the museum was not as highbrow as like the ballet. And with each monetary barrier you get to it, it's like that's considered higher and higher class. And so with music, I feel like music is, I mean, we have like streaming services that are now costing money, so there is a bit of a barrier to entry with some of it, but for the most part, like the cost to consume music is not nearly as much as it is to like go to a museum and consume art more than once. Because like I pay like $15 a month or like $11 a month for Spotify, and I can listen to the music as much as I want in my headphones in my home. But I have to pay to go to a museum, and I get one day to look at everything and sit with it and like see it. And I go home and I have to pay if I want to go back. And so there's, you know, in this discussion of like recession music and like knowing that people stop buying highbrow art, you know, it's very interesting to me to think about like what constitutes highbrow art. And it really is, I guess, the only thing that distinguishes them is just the barrier to go see it. That's literally the only thing. It's like, you know, because there's some, you know, it's art in different forms, because some of the art that hangs in MoMA is still like, it's comparable to some of the music that we've heard, but it's far more accessible for me to listen to like Lionel Richie or the Beatles than it is to like go to New York and go to the MoMA. And even that's like so many discussions about ethical art consumption. MoMA is one where like you just have to accept that the money that you pay goes towards these organizations and like benefit these people, and they get to pick what happens to the money, and you don't really control like what they're funding, what their motivations are. And you're kind of feeding their worldview, and you don't get a say in any of that. So like, and I know there was one of my friends in New York was very upset with MoMA, where there were certain people on the board who like had donated a ton of money to Israel. And so when you pay to go to MoMA, it's like the art is owned by specific people. And she was, you know, very like, she's like an activist. So for her, she's trying to be aware of like where she spends her money and where it goes and all that. And like for her, that was such a diversion of like just your moral values. And then it's like, okay, but they own all the Andy Warhols. All of Andy Warhol's paintings that hang in MoMA are owned by like one dude. It's owned by one person, and there's a board of people who decide what art is held and who's on the board. But they don't really decide, because it's decided by who has the most money to donate to the museum. So it's like, I don't know, it's just interesting and like a strange dilemma during recession, where like now nobody's buying private art. The art market is like dead. And I was looking on online forums and stuff, and a lot of artists who do commissions are saying like the art market's been dead for like 2 years. It's really, post-pandemic, it's been very hard for them to get people to purchase like art in the traditional gallery sense. And so it's just been done. And so I think that in some ways it breeds innovation, because like you're just making art for the sake of it and you're not making it to sell it. But a lot of times it kills a lot of artists, because now you have to go find a job, but like the job market's really bad. So what are you gonna do? Because like
it's impossible to
find a job. And the only reason why there were jobs during the Biden administration is because they were government jobs. So like, you know, it really is, it's just like this art is so, and I know like music is also like, all forms of art are pretty connected to like what's going on in culture. Like I think it's pretty hard to find any type of art that's political, honestly, in one way or another. But it just was interesting as we talk about recession pop and like the role of music, when I feel like art is a little bit more of an explicit, like lines are drawn because there is an owner of art, whether that's ethical or not. Like someone owns the Andy Warhols that are sitting in MoMA, so I'm allowed to go for a fee to go look at it, but it's not my, like, it's not for me to hear. Whereas music is a really specific type of art that like there's several creators and it belongs to them in a way, but it's an art form where you put it out and then it does. I think a lot of people feel ownership of it because it's so accessible.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it's I mean, well, because like you have the lyrics and then you have the music and then you have who's recording it.
It's also, I think one of the reasons I'm realizing that it's so personal is because art you go and look at and you might feel something, and then music you listen to. And I feel like the experience of listening to music is a little bit more stimulating and personalized than going and looking at art. Like, you can go and look at art and feel something. Absolutely. I think when you listen to music, it's a little bit more of a scientific connection to, like, obviously, like, colors are going to make you feel a certain way, but it feels a lot more personal because you have your headphones on and it's nothing, no sound, just the music. And then, you know.
I think also because music is so collective, and like traditionally before we had like recording devices, like the way you listened to music was you sang it with a group of people, or like you sat in like around the fire or like in a room somewhere and like you were listening to someone else live play that music. And like if you were a very rich person, you could just pay some bard or somebody, some performer to come in and just like
a jester,
to come in and like make the music for you. But like for most people for thousands of years, the music was a collective experience, which I guess circles back to our question of, or topic of, music and collective change. Because like you said, like art is like generally one person is making that piece of art and it's for the collective to view and interpret as they want. But in terms of the experience of making something, it is traditionally music is done collectively.
Yeah.
Not just one person.
That is like a really good point, because this also came up post Grammys with Beyonce. Beyonce has a ton of credits on her albums, and people always use that to say she's not a good musical artist because she has to bring in so many people. I mean, part of it is because Beyonce is one of the few artists who actually gives credit when she samples things. So that's one of the reasons you see as many people as you do, is because she samples something and then lists all the people who wrote the original piece of music. But Beyonce works in a lot of collaboration, which is how you get some of your best music. When Brat came out, I listened to Brat, obviously, and a lot of older Charlie stuff just because it reminded me of why I liked her. But then another thing that I really enjoyed was A.G. Cook produces all of her stuff. And so then I started listening to A.G. Cook's music, and he has this one song called Britpop that I really like that's really cute. And the whole song is like, because he just does a lot of instrumentals, he sampled Charlie XCX saying the word Britpop and then just cut that up and rearrange it into a song. I'm going to send it to you. It's really cute. But like, It's really fun too to see that, because like Charlie didn't write that song and she kind of performed, because it was clear that all he did was like come in the studio and say the word Britpop like 3 different ways, and then I'm gonna remix it. And so then when I listen to her music, it's like, oh, this, like, you can tell when it's A.G. Cook, and that's that collaboration. And that was another big thing about the Super Bowl, was that Kendrick kept it pretty small, where it was him, it was SZA, he had Uncle Sam, obviously Serena Williams, but he brought out DJ Mustard. And that was a really big deal too, because I think Metro Boomin was one of the first major producers I at least knew of who like didn't sing on tracks and like didn't rap, but like you knew who Metro was. Like, and he's so young, like, I think he's only 30. Like, you know, he put out projects and people are like, oh, you know, we know who Metro Boomin is and we know what he looks like. Because you hear the producer tags, like the Cataracts, like you hear them, but you don't always see them. So it was a really big deal during the Super Bowl for producers. But even the fact that he screamed Mustard's name in that song, and that like, even from the beef, like that was such a big thing that came out of it, with so many people, like myself included. I wasn't aware of like DJ Mustard. I didn't really pay attention to producers until some of this came out, because another thing that was a big thing was sometimes in the beef, in the midst of it, you know, they would have someone produce a song to get back at the other person, because like I'm collaborating with someone who you thought you were friends with. And that sort of happened. The reason why Kendrick had Jack Antonoff produce a track for him, I don't think it was simply because I know him and Taylor Swift like talk to each other and they're friendly, but Drake had that freestyle that was called Taylor Made, and it was kind of talking about like Taylor made you. And so he was like, oh, you think you're on Taylor Swift's level, I'm using her producer, what are you gonna do? And Jack Antonoff's another one that people see, and it's because he's in other bands. So like when he's in, I think it's the Bleachers is his band, and he does like Lana Del Rey's music. And so like,
oh wow,
yeah, he produces Lana Del Rey. He produced Sabrina Carpenter's latest stuff. You can always tell it's him because you hear the synth drums. But when he produced, which I'm a little tired of, but when he produced for Kendrick, it was very good. And I think that was also a really good, when you listen to like, now that I go and I pay attention to producers, it's really interesting to hear like Taylor Swift's music versus Lana Del Rey's music versus how Kendrick collaborates with them. And everyone's just different depending on the situations that they're in. So that's just like another thing about music that I find very interesting, and that like came up at the Super Bowl, is like it is incredibly collaborative, and art is collaborative in key ways, like traditional paintings, but you can have other paintings like murals or graffiti. I'm gonna have to do a whole episode on graffiti. Yeah, I feel so strongly about graffiti and how it's like this incredible art form of like taking back ownership of like abandoned places. We're gonna do an episode where I go through the King Rob and Banksy beef.
I just added it to the topics list
because there's a whole documentary on it, and it's so interesting because there's a whole subculture to graffiti. I'm wondering, now that I'm thinking about it, if it's just that because there's no ownership over traditional art and art galleries, is it more like, we know the music industry is exploitative, but there are ways for people to like now independently produce music. Yeah. I'm wondering if like for art galleries, it's just a little bit more, it's very exploitative because you don't see the artist, you don't see who they are. That's been more of a modern thing where like, I think, because I know a lot of people, if they really like artists, they're like, oh yeah, I follow this person on Instagram. So you know what they look like, you know where to find them, and then sometimes you see their art.
That's true, yeah.
Like I went to a museum with one of my friends, and she pointed to something, it's like, oh yeah, I know that artist. I like saw her at another thing. She's so cool. So it's, I don't know, interesting. There's such a loss of identity that happens.
Yeah, becoming more, I don't want to say part of the collective, but by being reachable. I mean, the internet has revolutionized so much of any art form, but yeah, that is, yeah. It makes creators more reachable to the collective, and in doing so, I guess, makes them more of a part of a group than just being on a little lone island.
Yeah, just too parasocial, too accessible.
But yeah, that's been, we've gone over a lot of topics, mainly about art and change. And yeah, do you have any final thoughts?
I think we should recommend some music we've been listening to.
Okay. I actually, like, if you have, I switched from Spotify to Deezer, and I actually am liking Deezer a lot.
Deezer sounds like a grunge, not a grunge band from like the 90s, or it's just like you grew up with them and they started in their garage and you went to middle school with their like older brother or something, and you come and they're like, it's my brother, he's in this band called Deezer, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a name that has like a lot of very fun joke potential.
Oh, yeah.
But I will say about this, like I actually am getting like actual shuffle, because on Spotify I feel like it was just playing the same 10 songs over and over again of whatever playlist I was in. But Deezer, I'm actually like listening to the entire playlist now. And I actually am getting recommendations for new music, which Spotify was just recommending the same artists over and over again.
That's true. They do that.
So so that's what I'll say. If you're looking to leave Spotify because of the company's decisions, Deezer's good. But yes, so I will recommend the band The Amazing Devil. They're honestly like my third favorite artist. They're just so if you've watched Netflix's The Witcher, the actor for
the little guy,
Jaskier, he is the Joey something. I really don't get to know the artists that make the music I love. I just know that he's one half of the Amazing Devil, and just the music is really incredible. The best song, my favorite, is Farewell Wanderlust, but also it just because it turns the lyrics are just so interesting and in depth, and the way they like sing together and interweave it is so interesting. But also the Horror and the Wild, also by them, is just a very fun, spooky fantasy type song. So that's my recommendation. Check out The Amazing Devil.
I have 3 songs I'm going to recommend. One of my friends made me aware of a Beyonce song I was not aware existed. It's called Turn. It's by The Dream, Beyonce, and 2 Chainz. It's on the Dreams album for like 2013. Another song, Raul Alejandro did a cover of Tu Con Él on his last album, and it's just like classic salsa and just like really cute. And I like how you can tell he feels it when he sings, and I really like that. And then I'm pulling for like very different genres. This song is big and has been big for a while. It's called Stress by Justice. It's like very prog rock, like dance, like out there kind of music, and I like it. I don't usually go too far into like experimental sounds because like sometimes you're just listening to noise, and I'm so sorry to anybody out there who's really into like experimental, you know, electronic music. I feel like sometimes
it's one of those art forms we need to exist, but
do we?
You don't necessarily have to enjoy. It's one of those things we need to like press the boundaries to like keep people in power in check, because you know that's the whole thing with like a lot of modern art.
I guess, but there's people out here just listening to a singular tone for an hour, Mo.
I know, yeah, but it's like it's important to challenge how we define music, so that even if we don't enjoy it when it gets challenged, if it's not an enjoyable experience.
I feel like with dance music, sometimes we get too far away from the drums, okay? And like, if I listen to your music and I can't find I'm good at finding a beat. Yeah. If I listen to your music and I can't find a beat, that's a you problem. And you might need to go back to the drawing board, because what do you mean? What is this? Mm-hmm. Sorry. I've tried some, and sometimes it's too much for me, but those were my 3 recommendations.
They're good recommendations. Yeah.
What I've recently been listening. Oh, and then one more. There's an artist, Viano Antillano. She is a Puerto Rican trans femme musician, and I feel like now is a good time to give shout outs to some of and another shout out, a lot of people know Young Miko. She's also a queer reggaeton artist who's very hot and makes very good music. So Viano Antillano, I'm late to the game. I just became aware of her, and she's been pretty outspoken recently about queer community and just like letting people know like queer people exist, you know, in all spaces. So want to give a little shout out to her.
That's awesome. I love that. Thank you for joining us. Check out our recommendations, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.